Hello and welcome to today's webinar brought to you by Chain and presented in concert with the Chronicle of Higher Education, which we're calling Learning Blockchain, a knowledge transfer approach. Today we'll be talking about a topic that is getting hotter by the minute, blockchain and education. Blockchain has been in the news lately. The skyrocketing price of cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Stellar Lumens, just to name a few, has perked up interest in blockchain technology. While all of these cryptocurrencies are based on an underlying blockchain technology, they are far from its only application. Blockchain has the potential to transform many sectors of the economy well beyond the financial markets. Of particular interest to those of us in higher education is the fact that the demand for graduates with experience in blockchain has risen considerably, even when factoring in recent economic crises. Given these trends, how can the higher education community prepare students for this brave new world? Today, we've assembled a panel of experts to ponder that question. Our panel includes blockchain technologists and college educators. We'll start off with Anjan Roy, Vice President of Chain, and then move on to hear more about the technology and its potential within higher ed from David Wasson, Education Practice Lead for Chain. Then we'll learn about the experiences of two educators from Portland State University. Christy Udis is a professor of accounting and information systems there, as well as the founder of its Business Blockchain Certificate Program. Stanton Heister, a professor in the business department and co-founder of the Business Blockchain Certificate Program at Portland State, will also share his thoughts. And I'm Michael Lamft, a Chronicle contributor. I'll be opening and closing the show today. We'd like you to contribute too. Now and throughout the webinar, you'll be able to use the Zoom Q&A function on the lower right-hand side of your screen to ask questions, which we'll get to toward the end of the webinar. We'll try to answer as many of them as we can, but please leave us your email address in case we run out of time and we want to circle back with you later with some answers. We hope you enjoy the presentation and that you learn a few things. Anjan, I'll leave it up to you.
Thank you, Michael, and thank you all. Thank you, my co-panelists, and thank you for all our attendees. And it's an honor here to present to all of you and in concert with such a venerable organization, such as the publication like the Chronicle of Higher Education. So as Michael, you mentioned, and what we're going to get into today. So we're going to start off, I'm going to give a really quick primer, a blockchain 101, and it's meant to be very, very layperson friendly, while still being accurate and comprehensive to the subject matter. Not always the easiest thing to do, as you know, with any type of these specialized subject matters, but we believe we have a really good 5-minute kind of example. Then we're going to dive right into, how do you teach blockchain, and more importantly, how do you learn blockchain, and how do you further that? And so it's an approach that, through our experience, as well as research in the field and related fields, we call a knowledge transfer approach. Then I'm going to hand things off to my colleague, David Wasson. He's going to talk about blockchain and specifically career demand and trends that he's seeing and that we're seeing and what the data and the research shows. And then finally, we're going to hand things off to a case study, our great colleagues here from Portland State University, and they're going to be sharing their experience on teaching blockchain. And then we'll leave, and as Michael mentioned, we'll leave Q&A towards the end. Please feel free, don't be shy to populate those questions during the course of this webinar, but we're going to leave most of them till the end, unless there's something particularly salient to the presentation. We may take a few, but to keep the flow going, we're going to keep those, we're going to move those to the end. So what is this learning blockchain, a primer and what we call a knowledge transfer approach? Well, let's start with the primer, or a blockchain 101. So imagine like a metaphor, entirely a metaphor here. Hopefully most of you know, and I'm going to assume that most of you know, a Google spreadsheet. It's that we can all access, which is what beauty of Google spreadsheets. We can all access them, 5 people, 10, maybe 100, maybe more, as many people as you want, more or less. Kind of a shared Excel spreadsheet, except it's with Google, so it's easily shareable on the internet. So imagine that, number one. Now imagine that you can only add additional lines to that spreadsheet. Okay, it's what we called, you can't erase, you can't go back and make changes. You can't do updates to existing lines. You can only add, and that's a term that's called append only. And if you follow the blockchain space, and if you've read maybe a couple of articles on it, but you're not like heavily embedded in it, you might hear a term called append only or immutable. And that's what that really, an example of that is. You can only add lines. You can't go back and change. Okay, so that's really point number 2. Now we start to get into some of the more unique aspects of blockchain. Now imagine that instead of it being one single spreadsheet that Google owns and 100 of us or 1,000 of us or 1 million of us for that matter have access to it, whatever amount, imagine that we all own co-equal copies of this spreadsheet, okay? I've got a copy. Let's say all my colleagues here online, David, Michael, you guys have copies. All of you, our participants, have copies. We all have and keep in mind that these are co-equal copies. It's not I've got one copy and that's the quote unquote master copy, and then you guys, everyone else, copies from me, okay? And everyone else updates to make sure you're in sync with the master. No, we all have co-equal copies, and that's the concept of decentralization that you hear a lot about. If you read about blockchain or you start to experiment with it. Now let's go on to another characteristic here. Number 4, we automatically stay in sync. Now that's really important too, because it's not really useful for us to all have to all have copies if we're not going to stay in sync, because then they're not really the same. They're not really copies of each other. And may seem obvious, but that's a really, really important thing, to have a mechanism via which all of us can stay in sync. And we call that, and the industry and the subject area, the field calls that consensus algorithms. And this can get very, very complicated to very, very simple. But that mechanism, the consensus algorithms, is what keeps us in line. It keeps us at consensus. Okay, so that's characteristic number 4. Now, number 5 is, let me get this. Our network predetermines what information is shared. And that's the transparency aspect that you hear a lot about with blockchain. So, for instance, we may have copies of the, on this Google spreadsheet, we have co-equal copies. We can only add. We have ways to keep us in sync. But we predetermine what part of this that we all share so that everyone can see. And that transparency element is really important to blockchain, because it depends on how you set up the network in terms of what is transparent and what is necessarily not transparent, which of course brings us to characteristic number 6. Our network also predetermines what information is private. Okay, so some things that we are going to be private, or maybe private only designated between 2 parties. For instance, if I'm sending a friend or whoever money, the amount, our identities might be kept private if, for instance, you're dealing with a particular cryptocurrency that's on the news a lot, because that network has predetermined that. But our identities are private. The amounts might be private, but that the transaction occurred is transparent. So that's an example, and that's just a way that one particular network set that up. But it could, you could predetermine however you balance that, balance both properties of transparency and security. Okay, and then finally, and this one is important as well, not only do we have, I mentioned this, co-equal copies of a spreadsheet that have data, okay, but we can also have code on that spreadsheet that is guaranteed to execute, and that code is shared. And you're going to hear a lot about smart contracts if you dive further into the blockchain space, and you hear about Ethereum, you hear about a shared compute resources. So, and what makes, and these are some of the more later generation blockchains, or say the more recent ones. Bitcoin and some of the early ones did not have this, or at least not to any significant degree. It's not quote unquote programmable. So when you hear about, for instance, programmable blockchains or programmable money or these types of concepts, they're really talking about smart contracts. But the real key concept there is that not only is the data shared, not only do we own share our copies of this Google spreadsheet, but that the compute and the code is also shared. which then opens up all sorts of possibilities in terms of how you can collaborate individually, how organizations can collaborate. What are the boundaries of an organization in terms of what is internal versus external? Well, once you start talking about shared compute power, then that opens up lots of different possibilities that we're only in the very early stages of realizing and benefiting from. So if you put all of these things together, what you get is really the final output of it. What does it provide? And there are many, you can spend 5 minutes on Google and probably get hundreds of great definitions, or at least passable definitions, some better than others, not all of them great, but passable definitions of what blockchain provides. For me personally, this was the best single sentence that I ever found. And it was from a practitioner in a British practitioner, I believe it's Ariel Levy in London. And he gave this one sentence. What is the best one sentence thing? Now, this is at least one of my favorite one sentence definitions of what blockchain really gives you. Blockchain enables multiple separate entities to share a single version of the data, keep that data in sync between themselves, thus removing the need to reconcile, message, propagate, sync, or otherwise maintain versions of the data that are co-owned by different parties to reflect one another accurately. So if you look at all of this is key, but once you remove the need, or even significantly lessen the need to reconcile, message, propagate, and sync, that at scale, if you apply that to uses and use cases of scale, can be incredibly powerful. Because if you even look at what the challenge of kind of collaboration is, human collaboration is, or when humans build things and do things, what makes us different is, one of the key things that makes us different is that we're collaborative in a way, hopefully in a way that's positive, not always, but hopefully, but that ability to collaborate and collaborate at scale is a major driving factor in why, humans have been able to accomplish what they've been able to accomplish and other animals can't, and so this opens up areas of collaboration and avenues of collaboration that can be incredibly, in fact, or potentially impactful, because you're removing the need to reconcile, message, propagate, and sync. So this is what it provides to us. Now, that's great, but is there a catch to this? Well, yes, there are. Unfortunately, there are no free lunches. There's a catch. And one of the big catches is that blockchain right now is very hard. And it's hard for all but the most technical learners. And so if you're in higher ed, or you're in a learning and development field, or you're simply somebody who's interested in learning this and not in this field, a key catch to this is it's not easy to be able to actually build and execute here in this field. It is getting better, but it's hard for even all but the most technical learners. And frankly, it's hard for even technical learners too. And so, yes, this technology has great potential, but right now it requires very specific skill set and background to become significantly proficient in. So that's a challenge. And then compounding that challenge is, it's really important that we get a variety of professionals and people from a variety of areas of domain and subject matter expertise to be at least fluent in blockchain if this sector is going to be able to achieve, and if we're going to realize the impacts and the gains that is possible with blockchain. So we're kind of in this catch-22 where it's potentially very powerful. We're starting to see some real powerful applications even outside of cryptocurrency, although that's the one that gets a lot of the publicity as of late. But it requires a skill set that right now is limited to enthusiasts. But if we're going to really be able to realize those gains, it requires people other than enthusiasts. So you're kind of in a catch-22 here. So let's dig into that a little bit in terms of how, a little bit more on the technology itself, and step back and look at some of the characteristics of blockchain. And then we're going to get to the how. Because if you look at, you go back to the Google spreadsheet example that's append only, shared, kept in sync, shared code, predetermined methods of security and transparency. If you look at this, any one of those, every one of those characteristics are not necessarily wildly novel. Even consensus algorithms, to some degree, have been around for decades in the computer science field. Going back to the early '90s and even prototypical versions of that even prior to that. But what it is novel is that you are taking these multiple pieces of technology, multiple different concepts, and putting them together in a very novel way. And so that itself creates a problem of abstraction, because these concepts, the predetermined concepts, while they may be older, they are very abstract. And then you're putting them in a way that is unique and that adds more complexity. So blockchain is you're getting these very kind of abstract concepts you're putting together, because you're dealing with things like encryption. You're dealing with concepts, obviously shared databases and shared ledgers, consensus algorithms, like all of these, and certainly smart contracts. All these things are complex. They're abstract. They're specialized. Then they're put together in a way that's very unique. That then amplifies the level of complexity and abstraction and specialization. It's also very, as you'll recall, it's not just collaborative, but it's hyper collaborative. It's a very social technology in a lot of ways, because you're providing this ability to keep parties and individuals in sync without propagating, without copying and pasting. And so that requires social in the sense of collaboration and working together and orchestrating together in a way that a guy or a person kind of sitting in their basement working on an algorithm alone, this is distinct from that. And I think that hyper collaborative part, we want to come back. I bolted that for a reason. It's also being utilized across disciplines and sectors. So there's obviously the financial sector and a niche within that with cryptocurrency that you hear a lot about. But it's also, there are applications in supply chain. There are applications that are experimental stages in healthcare, and everything from protection of personal data to clinical trials to the manufacturing process just within healthcare. There are, of course, there's some here that might be familiar, given our audience here in education and the whole idea of verifiable credentials and owning records. That's just one example. Certainly with ESG, environmental, social, and governance, which is, we've seen a big increase in interest, and issues of tracking data around, say, climate emissions, carbon emissions that deal with climate. So that's just scratching the surface in terms of its applications across these different spaces and subject matter areas are very wide. And so it's being utilized across these sectors. So it really requires kind of a multidisciplinary approach, and it's also in demand. And so what should we really prepare for? So the big firm Gartner and the management consulting firm McKinsey have both kind of they've called something called the 80-20 rule, where right now about 80% of the activity and interest in blockchain, I should say interest, but expertise, and those who are most active are people who are, technology enthusiasts. They're either developers or they're people with skills very similar to that. And about 20% are coming from outside. And if blockchain is going to achieve the impact and that it has the potential to achieve, we need to reverse the 80-20. We need to actually bring in non-technology enthusiasts across the various disciplines into the space and get them at least fluent. And we need to also get people from these various different subject areas to collaborate, because the hyper collaborative part is really, really key to blockchain as well. So we know what blockchain is. We know what we have to prepare for. So how do we do it? Well, we have an approach that our research and others, and we're not the only ones that put this out there, research have concluded that it may be helpful to talk about the importance of tacit knowledge. And so to step back for a second, some of you may be familiar with this concept called NONAKA'S knowledge funnel. It's named after a kind of a famous, even a legendary Japanese professor called Hiroko Nonaka. And he was very famous in the 1980s when Japanese corporations were particularly very much in vogue and very impactful in their model of success and what they did. And so his biggest contribution, some of you that are familiar with the technology space or the manufacturing space and software spaces may be familiar. He actually wrote the Harvard Business School case study in 1985 called the New Product Development, where he invented the term where he said, he looked at a manufacturing plant, a Toyota manufacturing plant. He said the way that the workers were collaborating together, it looked like a rugby scrum. And that is where the term Scrum, and then later became Agile Software Development, it comes from that paper in 1985. Probably might be the most famous Harvard HBR case study that's ever been written. Don't hold me to that. It's certainly one of them. It might be the most. His second biggest contribution, which probably would be more famous if he didn't have his first one, wasn't so famous. The idea of the concept of Scrum, was the knowledge spiral. And in the knowledge spiral, he talks about how knowledge grows within organizations, and it's a cycle of explicit knowledge, which is the stuff that's written down, and then tacit knowledge, which is distinct from this in the explicit knowledge. That's really driven by two things, and it's driven by internalization and socialization. And what is internalization is knowledge that's not necessarily explicitly codified, but it is part of you. You simply know how to do things. It's almost second nature to some degree. And at an organizational level, it's because that's particularly relevant because organizations have ways of operating and that makes them unique and special that may not all be written down. Sometimes it's called tribal knowledge. Although that's a slightly different thing, but it's still very similar to that concept. And so this idea of internalization and socialization, which happens from making it part of you, and also talking and working with others and colleagues to socialize, is really important for the development of tacit knowledge, the socialization and internalization. And we argue that this is particularly relevant when you're dealing with concepts that are very abstract, very complex, and very collaborative, such as blockchain. And so how do you really drive socialization and internalization? And how do you, in short, you do it by getting usage, getting people to do things. So if you want to learn blockchain, when you're not a technology enthusiast and you're not an expert, you have to do it by using it. And then that's number one, is usage. You got to go out and build it. Lecture and reading about it, the more traditional forms of explicit knowledge is important. And by no means are we saying this is a replacement for that. Quite the opposite, that they are a complement for each other. In fact, better internalization and socialization will actually drive better externalization, which itself will drive better internalization. It is a cycle for a reason, and it's a mutually reinforcing cycle. So you need usage. You need to get people to start using it. And number one. And number two is you need interpersonal interactions. You need people collaborating with. And of course, you need to do this in the context of blockchain. We need to move the industry forward, and for students and learners to take advantage of the opportunities to them. And the best way to take advantage of those opportunities is to move the industry forward where they're contributing where they're needed. You need usage and you need collaboration. So how do you do that? Well, we're going to be covering that over the course of this webinar. We have our colleagues from Portland State to talk about that. But coming up next, I'm going to pass things over to my colleague, David Wasson. He's going to talk a little bit about the career dynamics in blockchain and where we're seeing kind of the biggest opportunities. So David, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Anjan. Appreciate that. And as Anjan said, I'm going to share some information about blockchain career demand and also some observations about how educators are responding to that demand. So you can move forward. Anjan, thanks. So just a couple quotes to start out with. This first one is from a study that was given by LinkedIn. And this is a comment that the Daily Hold, a publication in the blockchain space, made about that study. It says, blockchain is now the most in-demand hard skill on the planet. And that's according to this study. And that was based in 2020, and that was even during the pandemic. Another quote that I'd like to just recite about demand for careers is from a gentleman. His name is Michael Sonashine, and he's the CEO of Grayscale Investments, probably the largest publicly traded investment trust in crypto and blockchain. And he said, what you really see now is a shift away from career risk of getting involved in digital assets, and now actually career risk if you're not getting involved in digital assets. So a couple of things about just current, roles that are in demand. This was from a study by a company called Built-in Tech Recruitment. And Built-in did a study in 2021 in January that looked at the most in-demand blockchain roles. And while software engineering plays a significant role, as would be expected, non-software related roles actually represent more than 50% of the opportunities. And those roles include marketing, operations management, finance, others such as supply chain management, legal profession, community relations, and customer service. So nearly 56% of the roles available in blockchain are non-technical. So some of those roles, this is more of an impact slide. I'm not going to read all of these, but some of the roles, and this is based on LinkedIn and also an Indeed, which is a job search platform. Some of the non-technical roles or opportunities that are available are project management, which I think Anjan mentioned, things like having Agile and Scrum, experience, business development, forming partnerships and new clients. Another big area of demand is procurement and supply chain operations. This is just a natural fit for blockchain because of the, chain of custody and provenance that it offers. Another is business analysts to work along with the technical developers. That a big portion of the demand right now is in the finance. And really, while blockchain is a technology breakthrough, it's also an economic breakthrough. It's a finance breakthrough. So there's a lot of roles in that. There's reporting and analyst roles in finance. There's payment and deposit systems, cross-border payments, regulatory analysts for anti-money laundering and know your customers, and then other more traditional roles like in customer service, public relations, human resources. So the way education, at least our observation and some other studies that have been done, how are educators responding to this new career demand? So this is a study that was done by Coinbase. And what it shows is that nearly 70% of all blockchain courses or curriculum at colleges and universities are being taught outside the computer science school. While computer science makes up 32%, which is significant, the other opportunities and other departments that it's being taught in are business management, economics, law, engineering, and humanities department. So pretty significant. So the feedback we've been getting from educators that are teaching blockchain are, one, of course, offering diverse academic studies, offering blockchain to diverse academic study departments, but also offering a high-touch learning experience. Because of the abstract nature of blockchain, it's important that students actually have a hands-on experience. And that really supplements, reading about or listening to lectures in classroom about blockchain. So really the hands-on, supplements that. Also with blockchain, it's moving very fast. The technology has a short shelf life. It expires quickly. So some of the feedback we've gotten from instructors is the importance of how to keep up with the blockchain technology so that your curriculum doesn't, expire before you start, actually instructing it. So that's very important to instructors, and that's some of the feedback that we've received. And it's also important to provide clear and understandable curriculum, especially blockchain, because it's fairly complex. But many universities and colleges are moving to a asynchronous format, and because of that, it's really important for the blockchain curriculum and the tools that you use to be very understandable. The other portion is a focus on real world use cases and problem solving. As Anjan mentioned, there's a lot of media hype, investment hype in the news, and that's part of the narrative, but that's not the whole story. What's important is to, funnel students into, real world use cases that have problems that can be solved. And then, many of our universities and colleges have started to adopt this. It's a critical question really for their students at the end of an assignment. Once they've learned about it and maybe hands-on used it, the technology is, does blockchain improve the business model? I mean, blockchain does not solve every problem, and I want to be clear about that, but that's a critical question that many universities and colleges are asking their students. So so that's just a bit about career demand. But at this point, it's my pleasure really to introduce Dr. Youthis and Dr. Heister of Portland State University. They both co-founded the Blockchain Business Certificate Program. It's also been my privilege to work with them for the last year and a half, and also to meet some of their students. So they've designed, I consider, a very novel education approach that, both for theoretical and actual hands-on, usage for students. So with that, I'll turn it over to you, Stan and Christy.
Okay, thank you, David. Let me share my screen then, and we'll get started. I assume everybody can see that.
It's not in PowerPoint mode though. Yeah, there you go.
It should be now, Christy. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Christy. You want to kick us off?
Sure. So yeah, we are blockchain at Portland State, and we're in a business school. We have this business blockchain certificate. Next slide. So we are located in Portland, Oregon. We're an urban university. We have about 26,000 students and about 3 or 4 in the business school. Many of those are from Oregon. About 50% are women, about 50% are non-white, 25% are parents. And in the business school, more than 40% are first generation students. So we've got a unique population, which is fantastic really for blockchain, because it's a very diverse subject and requires a very diverse set of interests and skills. Next. Okay, and so why don't you grab this one, Stan?
Yeah, so just a quick overview of kind of what our focus is. We focus on enterprise blockchain more so than, say, cryptography or cryptocurrencies, although that is part of it. The DeFi piece is certainly there, but it's enterprise blockchain. And of course, we focus on the business side. So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then we'll show you some slides, a couple of slides of what the actual, the layout of the 6-course 18-credit program looks like. So we like this particular quotation by Mike Schwartz, who's a founding partner of the Origin Foundation based in Switzerland. And he says, every now and then a truly stellar new technology emerges, and it always takes us places that we never imagined. So, and many of you've probably heard that blockchain has a number of different words associated with it, or phrases like the blockchain revolution or Web 3.0, those sorts of things. And it's especially powerful when you combine it with, say, other technologies like AI or Internet of Things, for example. And so we think that it's one of those technologies similar to the World Wide Web in the early 80s, that it's something that we needed to pay attention to. And that's in part why we went down the path we did.
So let me just give you an overview. So Anjan set this up so nicely by talking about Google Sheets, shared Google Sheets. And so if you're looking at this from a business perspective, it might look like this. So this is a set of 3 banks and 2 customers, and they've got a lot of transactions going on between them. And then each one keeps their own set of books or their own ledger. If you look at this green arrow to the far left, this relationship between bank A and customer B. So customer B borrowed 5,000 and owes customer A 5,000. And then in bank A's ledger, it shows that customer B has borrowed 5,000. And so that's great if those 2 ledgers match. But there are many times where those things are in dispute. One of our expert guests one time told us that at any one time, they've got $2 million in dispute with customers. It takes a lot of time and energy to reconcile these books, and a lot of this money gets written off because they can never figure out who owes what. Next slide, Stan. And so this is how that might look in a blockchain setup. So on the left, you can see those are all the ledgers of the individual participants, and they all keep their own ledgers just like they always did. But in addition, they have that shared ledger. So the very bottom item in that ledger is this loan from bank A to customer B. At the time the loan is made, they both sign it, they agree to it, they record it in the ledger, it's time-stamped, and it cannot be changed. So it becomes kind of a single source of truth. So later, if they find that their ledgers are not in sync and they don't agree on who owes what, they can go back to the blockchain ledger and see who owes what. So they all can agree. Now, the technology, as Anjan said, the technology is complicated, and that's true. But to create a blockchain ledger like this, could you go back, Stan? To create a blockchain ledger like that is just really not that technically difficult. What might be difficult is the business side of this. So imagine that instead of banks and customers, these are 5 universities that are trying to share classes. So they're trying to allow their students to take classes from each other and then keep a shared record of who's taken which classes. So to do that requires all 5 of those universities to agree on a lot of things. So first they have to agree on little operational things like, are they going to renumber their classes? And which classes are they going to allow students to take and transfer from university to another? And then it requires bigger strategic decisions on the part of each one of those universities, because they have to decide if it's in their best interest to join this blockchain. Are they going to get more students? Are they going to lose students? Are they going to lose credit hours? Is it going to draw more students to them? Each one of them has to decide that they're going to get value from participating. And it's hard enough to add a new system at a university. We're switching over to Canvas, and it's a big deal for this one little change at our university. But to get a blockchain, get these 5 universities collaborating together on a blockchain requires all the IT and all the strategy people to get together. So it's a big business challenge as well. And so that's why we started this business blockchain program.
Yeah, and as Christy just said, the technology and business professionals, they need a shared understanding of the benefits of blockchain, and it can't be just driven by IT. And that's really why we chose to build this in the business side, although we do work with the computer science group within the campus as well. But anyone who worked on a team of tech solution projects, for example, will find that oftentimes there's a void or a gap between the business professionals and the technology professionals in terms of their vernacular, how they speak about things. And we wanted to figure out a way, if we could close that gap, if we could get the business students up to a certain technology level, understanding the technology and the conversation around blockchain from both a business perspective as well as some technology perspective, which is why we'll talk about later. We have an awful lot of applied and hands-on oriented activities as well. But that's really important to be able to get business professionals to be able to understand enough about the technology so that if they're placed on a team with CS folks, for example, they're able to communicate and understand what's going on those projects and add value. After all, it's going to be driven by, ultimately, blockchain solutions are going to be driven, as somebody mentioned earlier, their economic systems, I think it was David, they're going to be driven by the business professionals out there. We're not going to implement technology just for the sake of implementing technology unless it provides some business benefit, whether it's additional revenue opportunities or improved operational efficiencies. It's going to be driven by the business side. So it's important that our business students understand this technology.
This slide, I'm just going to go through this quickly. Basically, what this is saying is this is new, as you know. So there aren't good models. We don't have syllabi. We don't have textbooks. We don't really have trained faculty. Academia changes very slowly. Blockchain, as Dave mentioned, changes very quickly. But so this little guy over on the right, this represents me and Stan. Despite all that, we decided to just jump in. We'll just figure it out. We'll learn as much as we can and start teaching classes. And that's exactly what we did. So here's the program that we developed.
Yeah, and it's difficult because of the speed of change and not having any textbooks. What you'll find is oftentimes you end up reworking the class, sections of the class or maybe the entire class, which sometimes can be a heavy lift from one term to another or from one year to another.
This is our basic program. So we have a short boot camp, and actually we can give you a link to that. There's an online version that's free, about a 5-hour class, so you can learn the basics. So all our students take that, and then we have fundamentals, just blockchain principles in the fall. In the winter, we focus on business, theories, strategies, practice. And then in the spring, we kind of move on to really apply. They do a lot of computer work in that, and we look at emerging issues, including kind of new exponential technologies that work along with blockchain. So the program is fully online. It's about half time for a year. We're on quarters. It's an 18 credit program. So there's 3 full classes and 3 half-sized classes. We have undergrad and graduate versions. And then it's also open to professionals. So as Anjan mentioned, blockchain is very collaborative, ultra collaborative and decentralized. So we have tried to make this program so that anyone can take it. So we have a process at Portland State, a quick admit process. If you're not a degree seeking student, you can take classes up to a half-time full of classes for in-state tuition. So professionals can join us, and they have, and it's been a really great program because of that. In addition, so it's high touch. We interact a lot with our colleagues in the community. The SIMBA people have come to our classes, helped us with course materials. We have a lot of expert guests. We have a great board, which we probably won't talk about, but yeah, it's very collaborative, and people are very willing to help. It's an extremely generous community because everyone wants things to succeed.
So we designed this program with a kind of theory and practice in mind, and we want it to be a very applied program. A lot of times when you see a blockchain class out there, wherever it is, it might involve a lot of discussion around use cases and things like that and how blockchain works. But what we wanted to get to is not just that, but also how, or not just how, but why. Why would a business do this? Why would they spend time and energy and money to implement a solution? What's the economic benefit from doing that? What are the improved process flows, for example, and how is our business gonna improve? So we looked at it from that perspective. We also created it, or we work from a human-centered design perspective, meaning that we think about who in the business will be affected by this blockchain implementation, and let's think about what they do on a daily basis. And I think Anjan mentioned Scrum and Agile a little bit. So we use, for example, user stories and personas and things like that to think about how somebody, say it's Peter Purchasing, and how Peter Purchasing goes about his job and what Peter Purchasing really wants to be able to do and how he wants to be able to do it more effectively. And then from a strategic perspective, Christy often likes to say that this is a team sport, and I think that was mentioned earlier as well. These systems that get together, they involve consortia, numbers of different companies sometimes in these enterprise blockchain situations, and they're economic systems. And the more people and more organizations that you add to these systems, the more you'll find that you get a network effect. Everybody benefits more when we bring in more into the group. But that takes governance, and it takes a lot of thought around this network effect and how we make this work. There's good examples out there for IBM and Merck with their Trade Lens project, and Walmart and IBM with their Food Trust project, where we can see these exponential benefits and this network effect take shape as they built out their programs.
And then we have a practice component. So first we have in our business lab, that's where we use Simba Chain and some other technologies. And then that gets them up to speed so they have a bit of computer science to sort of mesh the business and the technology side together. And then they also do consulting projects. So at first they do these things, we call them lunch and learns. They just meet with companies and explain what blockchains are. So these students who are just learning are explaining this to companies and telling them how it's affecting their industries. And then they move on to really try to identify use cases or usages of blockchain that could really be beneficial, both operationally and strategically for specific companies that we work with.
Yeah, so many of you may have seen the learning triangle out there in terms of student retention of information. And at the top of that pyramid, it's just 5%. And that's what people retain when it's pure lecture only. But at the very bottom of that pyramid, it's 90% when you can teach somebody information to the extent that they can then go teach others. And that's what we're really doing around these consulting activities. They're working with real companies. So the students have to get proficient enough with the topic to be able to teach somebody in a company, in an industry that may not know anything about blockchain and how those technologies work in their industry. So we're getting them to that level. We're giving them several opportunities to get in front of companies during their time in the 18 credit program.
Right. So if you think of that circle, that spiral that Anjan was explaining, that's exactly what we try to do. We teach them, they practice, they start internalizing, and it goes around. So here, I just want to show you, because since these guys aren't really promoting SymbiChain, I just want to show you how nicely this has worked in our program. So if you look on the left here, SymbiChain allows the students to start by drawing a business process. And here on the left, we've got a customer and a seller. And then in the center, you can see that the customer makes an order, and then the seller makes a shipment, which also involves the trucker, and then the customer pays. And so if these parties are all on a shared blockchain, they can watch what's happening as this process moves through the system. Students simply draw that picture and decide what information they're gonna store about each of these transactions. And then the SymbiChain software will create the code for them. So you can see on the right, that's just the code. And it looks complex if you haven't coded, but as students get used to this, they're really well prepared. So then when they move on to a coding class, they've seen it, they understand exactly what's happening and how the code relates to what's going on in a business setting. So SymbiChain has just been such a great tool for us. So just wanted to plug you guys, it's awesome.
So yeah, that's been great for our labs. You know, early on in our program, one of the things Christy and I wanted to do is get together a board of advisors, specifically to help us with the curriculum, the learning outcomes. What are the objectives that they want the program to have? If we were to produce a student that were to go out to work in an Intel, for example, or Nike, we have some pretty nice panel or board of advisor connections, and they're very helpful with the program, and they've been there from the beginning, and they've helped us shape the program into what it is today. We also thought it was really important to have students actively involved on campus, so we've created a student club or student organization, and they participate in a number of different activities like all student organizations do, and sometimes they get involved with national challenges, and we've won a couple of those. We're two-time champions of the National Blockchain Challenge, sponsored by TrueUp, and then we also participated and were one of the finalists for this engineering program that ASU did with the Department of Defense, which was a supply chain challenge that our students got involved with. So that's one way that we can also drive attendance into the blockchain program itself. So the student organization grows, they become more interested, they understand, oh, we do have a program here at Portland State. Unfortunately, a lot of universities, there are a lot of universities that have student organizations, and a lot of those organizations, or a lot of those universities, they don't have programs that the students can take advantage of. So we're lucky enough here at Portland State to have both.
And then I won't go into this much, but that little dark blue and green, that's our blockchain program. That can be a component of a bigger master's degree. It's a one-year master's that we've created that's applied data science for business. And so just in 1 year, students get the blockchain, but they also get a lot of in-depth digital transformation and leading change and strategy and some basic accounting and finance. And then in addition, they get cybersecurity and data structures, machine learning. So it runs the whole gamut. So that's another great program. And that's been we get great students from that program in our grad blockchain courses. And then finally, here's our website. We can put a link to that in the chat, and a free blockchain bootcamp if you want to just get online and explore more. Yeah, and we're open to any questions.
Yeah, so we wanted to end quickly enough so that we can field some questions. So if there are any questions that we or Anjan or David can answer, we're happy to do so.
Sure. We can, we have one last slide maybe David can go into, and then we'll, we will.
Sure, I can just talk to it now. So yeah, just a few things. I mean, Stan, thank you, and thank you, Christy. And as you notice, they mentioned a lot of different ways to engage. They have, and universities and colleges are engaging in different ways. Each one is unique in how they approach blockchain, but there's everything from a dedicated blockchain program like Stan and Christy have created. There's where universities are incorporating blockchain into existing classes. They're used a lot. Sometimes it's being utilized as an education tool in a student-sponsored blockchain club with maybe some faculty advisors as a good way to kind of test the water of blockchain. It's being used for use case competitions in different universities, and in some instances, it's actually a degree. There's one university I know of that actually has a master's degree in blockchain. So just a bit about who Simba is, and then we're going to move on very quickly. But just the way to think of Simba is we are a tool. We are a tool, a learning tool for any student to really understand how blockchain works, and from a doing perspective. But we don't just provide the software. We also provide instructors with training. We provide curriculum support. We actually will consult in terms of helping you with understanding relationships and modeling your different business use cases. We provide some educational materials. We do have a badging and certificate for Simba Chain, and also one that you can white label, and that's actually using block certs. So that's verifiable. Those certificates are verifiable on chain. And then we also, in some instances, offer instruction augmentation services. But that's it. We're very committed to the education space, and thank you, everyone. We're looking forward to hearing some questions, Anjan.
Thank you, David, and thank you for your questions coming in. So there are some questions. We've got a couple of minutes here, and feel free to put them on the chat or email us directly, and we'll be happy to follow up with you. One question, we've had a couple questions come up on the slides. I know Simba Chain, we will make our slides available. And because I know that question was asked by quite a few people. So to take a few questions, Bill asked a couple of these. How do you normally provide hands-on learning? Do you have a working lab environment or hosting services instruction environment? I think let's take that. I think David, you just touched on that. Stan and Christy, well, maybe elaborate a little bit on that. On what you're using, and but David, maybe you could take the first shot at that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and Stan and Christy will probably answer that, but certain universities, they do actually call it a lab. So they'll have a classroom, maybe it's a 3-month class in supply chain management. And then the last month is dedicated to how does blockchain, how does blockchain technology impact the logistics or the supply chain, or just looking at it from a business perspective. So that's one way. Another way to engage is like I had said earlier, just to have a dedicated blockchain program that has a pretty extensive lab. Some of them are doing workshops where it's kind of elective between semesters type boot camps like Christy had mentioned. But I think Christy and Stan can answer that.
Stan, did you want to catch up?
I was actually typing an answer to one of the other questions, so.
Yeah, so was I. So the boot camp, there's a lot of training online. There's a lot of free training online. There are a lot of courses that you can register for at Consensus and other places. And so you can learn a lot of the basics online. And then you want to move to a university, of course, for all that tacit practice and really in-depth theorizing about these things. But yeah, boot camps are a really good place to start.
Another question came up here, and I think it might be helpful for the whole audience. Although one of us, I believe, was answering it, a similar sort of question, and that is because the underlying subject matter changes, how do you keep your curriculum up to date? And I've got some ideas as well, but maybe we can start with well, whoever wants to start first between Stan and Christy and David, and I'll jump in if needed.
Yeah, I typed a quick answer to that, but yes, the technology changes rapidly, and so when we're looking for readings, we try not to make them more than 2 years old because things change a lot. But the fundamentals about the value of collaboration, decentralization, keeping an audit trail of everything that happened and timestamping, all of that, the foundational benefits are the same. And so understanding the core, that will not change. And so there's a lot that you can reuse from year to year. But then of course the technology is changing.
Also, what changes is how blockchain is now starting to be integrated with other technologies as well, like AI, for example. So we're continuing to look at those opportunities as they develop. And in fact, we're doing some research around that right now, Christy and I. So those are things that, yes, there is some juggling that needs to be done each year because it's such a new and evolving technology.
Yeah, I'd add just one other thing too. There's many blockchain platforms out there that can be used that are mainstream. So I think it's important too, if you're selecting tools, that you kind of remain agnostic to the blockchain that you select, because if you're going to go all in on one blockchain platform, that technology can change drastically before you implement a curriculum. So trying to find tools that are somewhat agnostic to the different platforms, I think, is important.
Yeah, great. What I would add to that is and really kind of dovetailing on the answers is to bring it. Part of the fundamentals is developing that tacit knowledge, and the beauty of that is that tacit knowledge in the process of developing it, which comes from usage and collaboration, be it here or any subject, but certainly with the properties of this field, is that is like a capability. And the beauty of developing capabilities like muscle memory is that you can then, it makes it easier to learn as the field progresses and as the field changes, the field builds. You know, it's kind of like, you know, it's easier to stay in shape than it is to get in shape, you know, and if you're in shape, you're a professional athlete, you have an off season, you get injured. I mean, you know, professional athletes can come back much quicker because they have that capability and, you know, muscle memory and all of that. And I think that's something to bear in mind, is to build that capability, which is around the fundamentals, as Professor Christie mentioned, and Professor Stanton, you both mentioned, and relate to that, but having that tacit knowledge being a part of how you build that capability. So I'll take, we got a couple minutes. Several of you were asking in terms of how to engage with SymbiChain. We will follow up with you if you're interested. I know some of you have put emails out there and asked about our model, and somebody, our firm, we have your email, you know, based on what you put in the chat. We'll follow up with you. Feel free to email David or myself here. You see our emails on the screen if you, as a follow-up, if you prefer. One example, but I did want to take another question was from Brian. Why did you, no, sorry, blockchain being used in research and think tank concepts or think tank kind of environments. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that, or any examples, or you see any potential on that in research type environments being used? Because that question I thought was an interesting one in the research space.
Yeah, there's a lot going on with that, because researchers want to share their data before they publish it, but they want to share it with each other privately, and then, but also maintain their ownership over that data. Yeah, so there's a lot going on in that space, especially in healthcare research right now, where think tanks are involved in these blockchains.
Sure. Too. Sure. And that's great. And the last one before we go, and I think this is interesting, David, all of you would take this, but David, based on your cross-university kind of interactions, Robert asks, where would the student organization for blockchain be housed? You know, business school, computer engineering, other. David, our education practice lead, you've talked to a lot of these universities, What are you seeing out there?
Yeah, that's a great question. And yes, I do speak to a lot of them. And it's really depends on the university. We're working with one organization. It's a blockchain organization. And it's actually University of North Carolina. And it's a mix. It's a mix of technical developers and actually business people. And they have I believe, a technical faculty advisor. So often it's a mix, and other times it's just dedicated to a certain college within the university. So it may be very business centric, or it may be very technical developer centric. So it's kind of a mix. It just depends on the university, I think.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you all. We are at time here, so thank you. Feel free again to follow up with us. If you typed in, if we did not get to your question, and especially if you were trying to contact us, Kamala, thank you so much for providing your email address. We'll be, I see you did on chat, we'll be following up with you. Feel free to email us here. We'll be doing these over the course of 2021, so we're open to hearing new topics from you. And so I'm going to sign off. Michael, you want to close things off here?
Sure. I just wanted to remind people that, as you mentioned, in early April, I believe we're going to be doing the next one of these, next SymbiChain webinar. And as you mentioned, there's going to be several throughout April. And I wanted to thank you and the guests for giving us so much to chew on. It's been great. Really appreciate everyone's input. And as you mentioned, anybody needs to reach out to us. We'll have answers to your questions if you ask them. If we didn't get to them today. Otherwise, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, everybody.